Our first panel of this year's conference is Faith Under Fire, the Battle for Religious Freedom in Iran, which will discuss the ongoing persecution of Iran's religious minorities, particularly of Baha'is, Christians, Jews, Zoroastrians, and Sunni Muslims. Panelists will examine the regime's oppressive policies and their impact on these communities, as well as the broader human rights implications and international responses. Our speakers are Nathan Sayeh, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council, Johnnie Moore, President of the Congress on Christian Leaders, and Janatan Sayeh, a research analyst at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. The panel is moderated by Nazenin Ansari, Managing Editor at Kayhan London. Welcome.
Good morning and welcome to this first panel on religious persecution in Iran. I understand this is the first time that National Union for Democracy in Iran has had a panel that examines religious minorities in Iran. And I want to thank Dr. Ganji and Mr. Ansari for inviting me and organizing this conference, in addition to all the fantastic help that your team has provided. Now, Khomeini's 1979 Islamic Revolution turned the once rich, modern, forward-looking, and developing Iran into a violent vehicle for the domination of a fundamentalist version of Shia Islam at home and the spread for an Islamic revolution globally. In 1979, Iran became a theocracy, where all civil, penal, financial, economic, administrative, cultural, military, political, and other laws and regulations are based on a fundamentalist interpretation of Islam. The state's supreme leader holds constitutional authority over the judiciary, government-run media, and other key institutions. Individuals who are not Shia Muslims are not only barred from serving as supreme leader, president, or chief justice, but they're also barred from being member of the top institutions that govern the country. They are barred from running in elections and are even barred from serving as public school principals. But let's not forget that it was after the Islamic Revolution that for the first time a special court of the clergy was established. These courts, each headed by a Islamic legal scholar, operate outside the judiciary's purview, but they investigate offenses committed by clerics, Muslim clerics, including non-religious activities and political statements that are inconsistent with government policy. In my years as a journalist, I've covered persecution of these Shia Ayatollahs and those who do not believe in the Islamic Republic. These include not only Ayatollah Burujerdi, who was defrocked, as you would say it, but also the Gonabadi dervishes. And in effect, they systematically disenfranchised and discriminated against anyone that doesn't think like them. Now, I am very grateful and I feel very privileged to be here speaking to eminent and distinguished experts on the whole area of religion in Iran. And to my left first is Ambassador Nathan Sayeh. You are a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, specializing in democracy and human rights, counterterrorism and security. And from 2017 to 2021, you served as acting undersecretary for civilian security, democracy, and human rights, and played a key role in US-China strategy, where you oversaw the development and implementation of a wide range of US government sanctions policy, including global Magnitsky actions. And you were instrumental in NATO's counterterrorism mission and efforts, including the global coalition to defeat ISIS. Thank you very much for joining us. Next, Reverend Johnnie Moore. You are an author, teacher, business person, and an acclaimed human rights authority. You're one of the world's leading spokespersons for Christians in the Middle East. And I understand that you also have a podcast that is run from London on a weekly basis. You are a leader best known for your consequential work at the intersection of faith and foreign policy, especially in the Middle East. And you were appointed twice to the U.S. Commission for International Religious Freedom. And you have won awards, including the Simon Wiesenthal Center's prestigious Medal of Valor. And in 2023, you were named as one of the world's top 25 young visionaries for your peacemaking work among Arab and Israelis. You're president of the JDA Worldwide and president of the Congress of Christian Leaders. And last but not least, Janatan Sayeh you are a research analyst at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, and your work, it focuses on Iranian domestic affairs and the Islamic Republic's regional malign influence. And prior to joining FTD, you were research lead at the International Republican Institute, where you worked on countering, again, China's authoritarian influence globally. I want to start with you, Jonathan. Can you provide an overview of the current state of religious freedom in Iran and the groups most affected by the persecution, especially after the Women Life Freedom and Mahsa Revolution? Thank you.
Thank you. The Islamist and Shia supremacist nature of the Islamic Republic persecutes all religious minorities, but those that are particularly vulnerable are perhaps those that are not recognized by the state, which would be predominantly Baha'is as well as Christian converts, as opposed to communities that are historically Christian, such as Armenians or Assyrians. These communities are particularly vulnerable because, according to the Islamic Republic's Sharia law, if one were to leave Islam, and that could also mean if you were just simply born to Muslim parents, if one were to leave Islam, that is a crime punishable by execution because you're essentially an apostate. But in addition to that, in addition to the penal codes that are against a lot of religious minorities, there are different institutions that discriminate and target religious minorities. For example, the executive order of Imam Khomeini, the Statad Ijaiye Farman Imam, particularly targets religious minorities and confiscates land and property from these communities. In addition to that, many public schools, like it was mentioned earlier, do not admit religious minorities to just simply educate themselves. In addition, when you examine the penal code of the Islamic Republic that's Sharia-based, I believe it's Penal Code 20714 and 20915 that explicitly states that victims of murder who are not Jewish, who are not Muslim, who happen to be Jewish or Zoroastrian, one of the official recognized religions, do not have the same rights as a Muslim victim of murder or their families. But this does not extend this extends beyond just non-Muslims perhaps, because Sunni Muslims in Iran also face discrimination, as we see that they're not even allowed to have a Sunni mosque established inside Tehran. And the bigger trend is that the more we see civic unrest and uprisings, the Islamic Republic cracks down on all angles of civil society and religious institutions. So after Mahsa, actually prior to that even, but Mahsa really amplified it, but prior to that, starting perhaps with the gasoline crisis, there has been an absolute increase of the regime security forces cracking down on civil society, religious institutions, and imprisoning different religious leaders.
Thank you. This is the first time that we see in Iran's long history that a political development has started that is secular, that religion doesn't play a role in the politics of the opposition inside Iran and outside Iran. Now, having said that, reports also indicate that Christianity is one of the most growing religions in Iran, with churches inside homes and underground houses and underground house churches. Now, though Christianity is permissible is a permissible religion, What is life for Christians like in Iran at the moment, Reverend?
Before I answer your question, I just want to say something else, which is I had the privilege of being in a lot of rooms. I've heard a lot of speakers say a lot of incredible things, but I'm not sure I've heard as powerful a phrase as we heard moments ago from this courageous woman who stood at that platform and said, "I was shot in the eye because I said one word, freedom." And I do not understand why the entire world isn't in total awe of the courage of the women of Iran. And I just want to say that I'm inspired by what you said, and I hope that millions and millions and millions of more people around the world stand up and say the same word, the word freedom. But I'm not sure that most of the people in this city, in Washington, D.C., including in our Congress, have an ounce of the courage that you have. And I just want to thank you for shining that light of courage in this, the most powerful and important city in the world. So I just want to say that. Now, when it comes to the Christians within Iran, there are traditional Christian communities, several 100,000 traditional Christian communities, and the official number is maybe 500,000 of converts from Islam to largely evangelical Christianity. This is, by the way, the doing of the Ayatollahs. The Ayatollahs, in my view, and I'm not a theologian of Islam, but in my view, from the outside looking in, they have created a new religion. It's not Shia Islam, which they practice. They practice a corrupt form of political Islam that has appropriated theology from the centuries. Has misappropriated theology from the centuries, and in so doing, they are the ones most responsible for millions of people leaving Islam to find faith in another place. And there are probably more than 1 million underground, secret evangelical Christians right now living under the tyranny of the Islamic Republic in Iran. The powerful voice of these people isn't just in their alliance with activists because of their commitment to freedom. That's what religious freedom is about, by the way. It's about freedom. It's about the freedom to believe and to be, who you want to be based upon your sincerely held religious beliefs. They're not just the allies of the activists. They are also the people who pray every day for the good and the future of that country. They're the people who are willing to sacrifice their own lives and livelihoods. They're also an incredible network of peacemakers all across the region. And so very often when the Islamic Republic, which in my view is responsible, there is not a problem in our world that either isn't instigated originally or given oxygen by the Islamic Republic. And very often there are evangelical Christians who just want to be left alone. They just want to live their lives. But when April 13th this year, when Iran decided to attack Israel, there were evangelicals by the many thousands praying that those rockets and munitions were shot out of the sky and that they did not land in Israel because they believe in peace. And they also, that word freedom is one of the most powerful words in our New Testament. It's at the heart of our faith. And despite all the efforts of the Ayatollahs to persecute us, to marginalize us, to squash us, our community, we believe the fastest growing Christian movement in the world may be what's happening underground in the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Very interesting. Ambassador, since as long as I remember, there have been human rights reports about the abuses and the ongoing of religious minorities in Iran. How have international organizations and governments responded to these violations? Do you think they have been effective? And how do you think the United Nations' current mechanism in holding the Islamic regime accountable, what additional steps can it take?
Well, thanks for the question. Thanks, everybody, for being here for a really compelling conference over the next day and a half. I guess I'd start by talking about the state of religious freedom in Iran, not just for minorities, but for members of the majority, too. As we've heard, the Islamic Republic is not a great place if you're a Christian or a Jew or a Sunni. It's not so great if you're Shia either. Women, as we all know, beaten into comas, beaten to death for the crime of showing too much of their bangs. Other religious leaders in the Shia community being excommunicated, defrocked. It's customary for us in the West to think about religious freedom as a struggle between a majority faith and minority faiths. That doesn't really map onto the reality of what's happening in the Islamic Republic, because religion itself, regardless of your confession, religion itself is under assault and has been since 1979. What can we do about it? You mentioned the UN. I had to stifle a laugh because I don't believe that the United Nations has the moral standing to affect positive change in Iran, let alone the capability or the will to affect positive change in Iran. I think what it's going to take is a coalition of like-minded nations and also civil society organizations, many of which are represented here in this room today, to accomplish two things. One, maximum pressure on the regime. Two, maximum support for the Iranian people. Remember, the first victims of the Iranian regime are the Iranian people themselves. They need our support. They need our moral support, but they need more than that. Why is Starlink not operating in Iran yet? If anybody has Elon Musk's phone number, you might suggest that to him. We need to be providing the Iranian people with access to Western sources of information so that they can question for themselves the propaganda that comes out of Tehran. We need to provide them with technological conduits so they can share information with supporters in the West, video footage of protesters and what they've suffered by the regime's henchmen. The more information that gets in, the more information that gets out, the better supported the Iranian people will be. But we also have to put the regime back in the economic crosshairs. During the previous administration, we imposed a series of overlapping, layered sanctions that essentially bankrupted the Ayatollahs. At the end of 2020, beginning of 2021, the regime's foreign currency reserves were, I don't remember the number, 4 billion, 6 billion, the estimates vary. For those who are keeping score at home, that's roughly equivalent to Haiti's foreign currency reserves. And the point is not to impoverish and immiserate the Iranian people. The point is to deprive the regime of the resources that it uses to suppress its people at home and to export violence and revolution and bloodshed around the world, targeting not just Israel, not just Israelis, not just Jews, but any of the regime's enemies in South America, in Europe, in Africa, and elsewhere. Until we get back to a place where we see the Iranian people as our natural allies and see the Iranian regime as an adversary to be pushed back upon, I fear that we're not going to make adequate progress.
Thank you, Ambassador. Jonathan, the ambassador talked about how the biggest group being persecuted at the moment are actually Muslims. Dissenting Ayatollahs there. Mosques have been destroyed, cemeteries of not only Baha'is but also Muslims have been razed, their properties have been confiscated. But this is not all that is happening inside. What the regime is also doing is spreading global anti-Semitism abroad. Give us a picture of what they are doing and how can that be handled? Thank you.
So I would say the Islamic Republic has very effectively capitalized on the anti-Israel and pro-Palestinian sentiment happening here in the United States. And anti-Semitism has been one of the main pillars of their malign influence strategy. I think it was in July that the US ODNI issued a statement mentioning that Iran has been funding and organizing pro-Palestinian protests here in the United States. And that strategy is not any different in Europe either. They use Islamic centers, quote unquote, which are effectively fronts, to propagate anti-Semitism. I think it was in the United Kingdom. They have ties to biker gangs in Germany to target Jewish communities specifically. So I think one key point to address there is to make sure that we debunk the narrative propagated by the regime and their supporters abroad that the Islamic Republic is strictly anti-Zionist and not anti-Semitic. Well, they're actually in fact both. We have, as we mentioned, what happens inside the country, but also abroad. They specifically target Jewish communities. They target synagogues, whether it's going to be in Germany or in France. And this, just to highlight, does not really strictly stems from the Islamic Republic strategy itself, and does not really stem from Iranian culture, because as we discussed, Jews and also a lot of Christian communities have a very, very rich history inside Iran. So I would say Tehran is closely watching any form of civic unrest related to the Middle East or Israel-Palestine to effectively hijack these movements and to an extent instigate, but really capitalize on and really expand some of these malign activities that we see abroad.
Thank you. Reverend, you tweeted a few days ago that one day after the Ayatollah's profane reign of terror is over in Iran, the Christians of Iran will play a key role in making peace with America and Israel. How could regime change in Iran potentially improve the status of these activities?
Well, I mean, it's very clear. The Islamic Republic regime is holding the Iranian people hostage. And by the way, they're holding our entire world hostage. I mean, every single thing that's happening right now in the Middle East, as we're here right now today, watching what's happening with Hezbollah and Hamas in Israel, every single piece of it, every single element of it goes right back to the Ayatollah. That's where it goes. And so the people of Iran they're desperate for a different future. They absolutely want a better future for the world. And we're actually doing the work of the terrorist in Tehran by spreading their own narrative that somehow the Ayatollahs represent the Iranian people. The exact opposite is true. What we saw today is the voice of the Iranian people. What we hear is the voice of the Iranian people through not only the persecuted minorities, but also the majority. In fact, there are a lot of Shia in Iran that it's time to take back their own religion from the Ayatollahs who have corrupted it. All you have to do, go read Shia texts. Go read the human rights discourses of some of the most profound Shia authors. This is not the religion of exporting terrorism, of shooting women in the eye just because they say the word freedom. And finally, it's time for people who actually profess to love freedom and democracy and human rights to get a backbone and do something about it. I mean, while we're sitting here in the United States of America, the Iranian regime is trying to assassinate not only the former president of the United States, but multiple former members of that administration, while we're protecting, given a red carpet, the Iranian president and a whole delegation in New York City right now. The only thing the Iranian regime understands, the Islamic Republic only understands strength. We cannot bribe the Islamic Republic to better behavior. They will always win that battle. And it is so incredibly profane that there are elected members of Congress in the United States of America that act like, by negotiating with this regime, that they are somehow helping the Iranian people. They are not helping the Iranian people. They are empowering their persecutors. They are empowering their leaders. What we have to do is exactly what we've heard here already today. Maximum pressure worked, but you know what also needs to be done? The Iranian people need to understand that the United States of America and all freedom-loving people around the world are with them. And by the way, if our governments don't do that, then civil society will be doing it anyhow. In my case, the evangelical community, I know, it's a form of Christianity people don't actually understand. Let me just give you something you can understand. We represent a third of the electorate in the United States of America. Okay, there are 700 million of us around the world, and on this issue, there is total moral clarity, and it's time for our elected officials, whatever political party they're part of, to listen to us.
Thank you. Ambassador, you have led leading efforts to counter terrorism, and obviously the Islamic regime in Iran is currently using not only Eastern European armed gangs, but gangs everywhere, whether it's in Mexico, South America, Africa, to wreak havoc. And certainly, as the Reverend mentioned, we have news that they are after former President Trump. What is your advice to either administration, whether it's Democratic or Republican? What can be done?
Well, I think the Reverend put it exactly right. Iran doesn't respect weakness. The Islamic Republic respects strength. And right now, they perceive weakness in the United States. Why are they plotting to assassinate former President Trump? And not just the former president, but many members of his administration, because they think they can get away with it. Why have they tried to kidnap and murder Iranian American activists from their homes in the United States? Because they think they can get away with it. Why do they think that they can fund terror proxies like Hezbollah, which has tentacles that spread across the entire globe? That has weapons caches that have been discovered across the entire globe, lying in wait for orders from Tehran to go out and use these ammonium nitrate caches to blow up buildings, to blow up community centers, to kill Jews, Christians, any enemy of the regime. Why? Because they think they can get away with it. And where would they get that idea? They get that idea because they see that constant provocations from Tehran are met with indulgence. Well, maybe if we offer more concessions in the nuclear talks, that will create goodwill. That's not how the game is played. Anybody who has ever played the game of dealing with an authoritarian regime understands that that is no way to conduct diplomacy. So if you like Iranian meddling in American elections by trying to remove presidential candidates by bullets, if you like the Iranian regime kidnapping American activists, if you like them targeting former government officials, keep doing what you're doing because you're going to get more of it. If, on the other hand, you think that the American homeland must be inviolate, if, on the other hand, you think that there's a through line between protecting American citizens and standing up for freedom-loving people in Iran and constraining the ability of the Iranian regime to sow violence and destruction around the world, the policies that follow from that insight speak for themselves.
Thank you. Now, I think, do we have time for a few questions from the audience? Yes? Okay. Anyone, any questions for our panelists? You have all the answers you wanted? Yes, please. Can you please identify yourself and your organization? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Simone. I'm an individual. I'm not representing any organization today. I thank you for your presentation. I submitted my question through the portal, but I'll just say it out loud. My question is specifically for Mr. Sayeh. With all the polls that are available indicating that for all intents and purposes, people are distancing themselves from religion in Iran, and majority are actually not even identifying themselves as Shia. So as we're hearing about the majority rule or majority religion, that really is kind of a loosely used term. How do you see the future as of a secular Iran where we don't have that situation anymore? And does that bring you more hope, or does that also create more hope for being able to eliminate this oppression by a minority, actually?
Thank you. No, excellent question. To kind of back up the the suggestion that more and more Iranians, especially amongst millennials, younger millennials and Gen Z, are distancing themselves from religion. To your point, yes, most polls indicate that, but regime officials themselves are very, very paranoid about the third, I guess, generation of the revolution, which would be the Gen Z folks that we saw on the streets on Mahsa Amini and forward. They're very paranoid, and they've highlighted that, one, they had to shut down a lot of mosques because they don't have enough attendance. In addition to that, they have numerous different programs for young kids to join. For example, there's the Basij for students. That the membership for those communities, or I guess those programs, are in severe decline. Speaking from personal experience, having grown up in Iran as a Jewish person, I can also confirm that most people that I went to school with did not necessarily identify as a certain religion. You know, I'm hesitant to say I even had many friends who identified as Muslim, to your point. So I think the question is, as you know, given that void, number one, what does that mean for the future of Iran, and how are we going to fill that void, if there isn't even a need to fill the void? As to what it means for the future, I think makes us here very optimistic that a future after this regime, as we've highlighted numerous times, is going to be secular and democratic. So very high hopes for Iran's younger crowd that have been distancing themselves from the teachings of even their parents, who've used to be more religious and now are more in decline. And as to what that void, I mean, if the question is there even a religious void necessarily? That's perhaps debatable. I'm sure many are turning into Christianity as well, but I think that instead has resulted in an increase in nationalism as well, and nationalist sentiment. So, for example, instead of hearing stories about Muharram or hearing stories about the Imams, I think kids are more and more, or young people are more and more interested about hearing from the Shahnameh, for instance, or just being more proud of their pre-Islamic history, which is significantly vaster and more rich than 1,400 years ago and onwards. So this is all perhaps to say that given this void, and given the young people's willingness to stand up against what has been forced upon them for all these years, is that we're dealing with a very resilient generation. We are dealing with a generation that has been very vocally highlighted that they want democracy and they want secularism.
Reverend.
Yeah, I'll just add, you cannot have a secular democratic Iran without religious freedom. And I know everyone understands and agrees with that in this room, but I'm sometimes concerned that activists for a secular democratic Iran or a secular democratic whatever, rightly so, or so find this regime so abhorrent because of the way they've abused religion, that we're not thinking enough about the importance of the free practice of good religion. Okay, I always say that the answer for the worst of religion is the best of faith. And you know, one of the reasons why I sent that tweet out a couple of days ago, which I tweet too much, I'd forgotten I even sent that tweet out, is that the Christians, at least in my community in Iran, they want peace with America. They want peace between the Arabs and Israelis, between Iran and Israel. They're advocates, and they're advocates precisely because of their religion. And so I think, you know, what we've seen all around the world is extremists are very good at weaponizing religion to cause chaos and terrorism all around the world. And people who love democracy and freedom almost always discount, you know, the power of religion to mess all of that up, but also the value of religion to hold it all together. And so we don't have to make a choice between religion or no religion. We can choose religious freedom in a secular democratic country. And just to add another point on a previous question, it's very clear why the regime in Tehran wants to assassinate members of the previous administration. It's because they're terrified that the previous administration is going to have the opportunity to finish what they started. Okay? Now, let me tell you something about the current administration. the current administration or a future Democratic administration would be very, very smart to adopt the policies of the previous administration because they're popular in this country. By the way, this administration adopted a lot of the Trump administration policies on the Communist Party of China. I think to a shocking degree, they carried on a lot of those policies. But they chose immediately to unravel the policies related to the Islamic Republic. And so, the incumbent president is not going to be the next president of the United States. It's going to be Donald Trump or Kamala Harris. What they should be doing is they should be arguing with one another about which one's going to be tougher on the Islamic Republic of Iran. That's the winning political position. And if you have any question about the consequences of the latter, just turn on the news at any second of any day, in any country, in any language, all over the world, and there it is. That's what's happening. The chaos in the world is because of these policies. The good news is they can still be corrected.
Thank you. You have it? No. Okay, any more questions?
Sorry, as a reminder, there is a QR code on the screen to submit questions, and a member of our team will answer all submitted questions. We have one question from the audience, general question for the panel. Pre-1979, religious groups in Iran coexisted in peace. Is there hope that that can happen again?
Yeah, I think there is, because that's the DNA of the Iranian people. This is a multi-confessional, multi-ethnic state that has thousands of years of history. And the Islamic Republic superstructure that has been forcibly superimposed on top of this thriving and vibrant society is an artifice. It's not natural. It didn't come about naturally. It is not sustained naturally. It came about through force. It is sustained through force. I think when you remove the theocratic autocracy with which the people of Iran are currently burdened, you sort of default back to the status quo ante. Keep in mind, we keep saying Islamic Republic, but every time I say those words, I'm reminded of what Voltaire said about the Holy Roman Empire. Right? It's neither Islamic nor is it a republic. It's not a faithful application of Islamic principles, and it sure as heck is not a republic that exists for the benefit of its people. Just wipe it away, put it on the ash heap of history, and I think what will emerge will be something that is very familiar to the United States, a multi-confessional, multi-ethnic, secular democracy that is stable, that respects religious freedom, and in which authentic religious practice thrives.
Thank you. Please. Yes. Mr. Armin Babin. Ambassador.
Yeah, quick. Thank you. Thank you for the question. Quick reaction to that. So for those of you who couldn't hear, the question was about the Iran Experts Initiative and the regime's influence on the current administration through various different vectors. This is a story that I'm surprised hasn't gotten more press. Other than a few inside the Beltway publications, it's been largely ignored by mainstream media. But this is a good illustration of the insanity that really underlies initially the Obama administration's approach to Iran and now the Biden administration's approach to Iran. Their theory of the case is that the United States is a source of instability in the Middle East, and that Iran, if left to its own devices, would be a source for stability in the Middle East. That's why you have the JCPOA structured the way it is. What we're going to do over several years is increase the economic ties between the Islamic Republic and the United States and other Western nations, integrate Iran into global economic and diplomatic structures, and suddenly the peace will break out. It's insane. It was insane when this was the guiding theory behind the Obama administration's Iran policy. It is even more insane that the Biden administration today clings to it. We know what a Trump administration 2.0 would look like. My hope, and maybe this is naivete, my hope is that even if a Kamala Harris presidency begins in January 2021, that would be an inflection point that would cause people in power to think, you know what, the past 4 years haven't worked, and the 8 years of the Obama administration didn't work. We're actually worse off with respect to curbing the power of the regime, protecting and defending the rights of the Iranian people. Maybe it's time for a course correction. Call me naive, but one can always hope.
Well, we have come to the end of our session. As Ms. Tawakkolian said, thankfully, Iranians have hope, and their hope is themselves. Never for the past 45 years has the Islamic Republic, the regime, been so at odds with itself. It's no longer a question of if, but when. And I hope that as the Iranians stand on their own 2 feet to bring about freedom and democracy and modern Iran, the world will stand with them. Thank you very much, and thank you to you all.